Hi guys, my name is Trinity, and if you're here, you must be here to talk about books because that's why I'm here. And today we will be talking about my quarter one hits, misses, and DNFs. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. I deem it that just because I think it's funny, not because I think any books are really all that bad, or, I don't consider the DNFs to be technically ugly. They just weren't for me. They weren't for me. And so let's go ahead and kick this off with my DNFs for the first quarter. Now, I will admit to being somewhat lazy and just inserting pictures because for a quarter one wrap up, it's gonna get messy in my library and I don't like that. So I will be pulling all of my information from the computer. Just to mention too, I have had a rough few months just in life. So my reading hasn't been quite what it was last year. Also, I reset my reading goals from last year because I was reading too much. I wanted to participate in life with a lot of the COVID stuff being kind of over, like no mask mandates. I could actually go out in public and all of that stuff. I wanted to live a little bit more than I had the last couple of years. And so I set my reading goal to 100 this year instead of the 144 that I had last year. So I have been trying to slow down. I haven't done great. I'm 3 books ahead according to Goodreads. So I probably still will go over the 100, but that 100 mark makes me slow down. Forces me to slow down a little bit, or to at least say, okay, you can pull back this month because you're way ahead. So there's no need for you to keep reading as much as you have been. So surprisingly enough for me, I haven't DNF'd that much this year. I'm usually the queen of the DNFs, and I guess this year I have really latched on to what I like in books, and I'm not picking up a whole lot of stuff just because everybody tells me to. So I'm pretty excited about where my reading has been going and everything like that for this year because I've enjoyed most of what I've picked up. And I do have to say that the books that I have DNF'd this first quarter, I know some people like. So I know actually a lot of people like them. They just weren't for me. So the first book that I have to talk about, if I'm talking about DNFs, I haven't really talked about it much because I was so bummed that I didn't like this book. And I will say that I was bored. That's pretty much all I can say about it. I was completely bored. I was disappointed because I love the first book so much. But that would be The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart. I haven't talked about this very much. So I got an advanced listening copy from Hachette Audio, and I was so excited about it because I really, really enjoyed The Bone Shard Daughter. But I don't think I like the direction that the story took in book 2. I had no interest in it whatsoever. The characters that we have been rooting for an entire book, their lives completely changed into something that was not interesting. I like political intrigue, but if that's all that your book is, I'm gonna get bored. And this book was so one note for the majority of what I read, and I got about 50% of the way through it before I DNF'd it. And I have to say, it ranks amongst my most disappointing reads of the year because I was ready for more of the discovery of the magic. I was ready for more of the lore of the islands. I was ready for so much stuff, especially with the ending. I was ready to delve into a lot of that stuff, and we didn't. I don't know what it was supposed to have happened because, like I said, I only got about 50% through, but I couldn't take it anymore. And I have to say, to point out that I am a plot-driven reader, and so I didn't see the direction that this story was going, and so I wasn't interested. I wasn't interested. And I hate that because, like I said, I really loved The Bone Shard Daughter, but I'm kind of glad I never purchased it because the second book I DNF'd, and I don't plan to continue with the series after that. So the next book is a very well-loved sci-fi fantasy, and I have to say part of my DNFing this was because everybody was hounding me to read it, and there was a whole thing about my tastes going around. And so I may have been a little salty when I went into this book. But I don't think that N.K. Jemisin is the author for me simply because her writing style and my brain don't really mesh. And that is because I have ADHD and dyslexia. And so when I sit down to read N.K. Jemisin, I can read her short stories just fine. And I actually really like her short stories. But when I have to do that through an entire novel, there is a disconnect with her writing that I can't pinpoint quite exactly. But I do find the fact that she focuses on a lot of mundane things to be a huge issue for me because I don't care. I don't care. I've talked about this before whenever I read The Shadow of the Gods. I don't care how you make your oatmeal. I really don't. And do we need multiple scenarios of you making your oatmeal? No, we don't. We really don't. But I think that that is why the 5th season fell short for me, because there were things that we focused on that I just didn't care about. I would have really liked to pursue a given POV over some of the others, and that's always a problem for me. Like, if I really, really like one POV over others in the book, then I'm just going to wish that the book was about them and then not care so much about the others. And so I think that that hurt the book a little bit, in my opinion. And I ended up DNFing it because I was done. I was done trying to explain my taste. I was done trying to have conversations about the book. And I didn't care anymore. I just didn't care anymore. So yeah, that's the 5th season and why I DNF'd it. And then the third and final DNF that I have had for quarter 1 would be The Red Knight by Miles Cameron. Again, this is an issue of I couldn't see where we were going, and so I really didn't care. And I had heard that there were other issues that were about to hit. And with what I was feeling initially, I got about 30% of the way through it. I was just kind of put off to it, I guess I should say. And having been put off to it before I even picked it up, just by what other people said, and not really enjoying the first 30% that I had read of it, I DNF'd it. Now, initially, I had planned to go back to it, pick it back up, but the longer I left it alone, the more I was like, maybe that's just not the book for me. And I do plan to pick up more Miles Cameron, but not this series. And it makes me sad because I had been told by quite a few people that if you want a plot-driven fantasy, then this was the series to pick up. No, I didn't see any direction in the 30% that I read, so I can't say that this is a plot-driven book at all. Now, it did have some pretty good character moments leading up to where I was, but I'm not a character-driven reader. And so unless your writing is absolutely brilliant, and I mean absolutely brilliant, then I'm not going to care. I'm not going to care. Okay, so we have talked about the DNFs. Now let's talk about the disappointments, because I had a couple. Again, my reading Q1 was kind of great, so there's not going to be a whole lot to fill this slot either. Get some coffee before we get into the salty. Okay, so you guys, if you have been watching, you probably know what I'm gonna say first, and that would be And I Darken by Kiersten White. I have said a few times, this was the okayest book I've ever read. So I picked this up for multiple reasons based on multiple recommendations. I'm a huge fan of enemies to lovers. That is one of my favorite tropes. Give me grumpy sunshine. I really, really enjoy it. I love it. But I actually really like enemies to lovers. Like, I want them to be enemies. I don't want their parents to be enemies. I want them to be enemies. Yes, I know, toxic relationships, all that. Whatever. It's fun to read. Don't judge. So I picked it up for that, and I was very disappointed because here we have something I should have loved. Why? It's historical fiction. It's historical fiction fantasy, but it's historical fiction. I love historical fiction. I love fantasy that reads like historical fiction. I love fantasy that actually brings in historical figures. So, Vlad the Impaler, he is one of my favorite, let's just say, people to follow, to read about. I love vampire tales. I love the stories of Vlad. I love reading them. And so I should have liked this. There's so many reasons I should have liked this. It was okay. It was okay. I finished the book, but man, was every single part of it disappointing. And I was just like, I didn't like the characters. So one of the main things that actually really bugged me about this is there's a miscommunication trope, not between the romance, but between a brother and sister and who they like. They like the same person. I hated that. I was like, y'all are siblings. You should be able to talk about this. Why are we having a miscommunication trope with you two? Like, you're siblings. Figure it out. Work it out. But no, the miscommunication trope happened between them, and that killed the book for me. Like, I couldn't have thought good thoughts about the book after that. It was bad. It was bad. And then the historical elements that were there, I didn't really enjoy reading about, because they didn't pertain to anything important within the story. And so I had so many issues with this, but at the end of the day, it was okay. Like, it was okay. It was the okayest book I've ever read. Atmosphere was okay. Characters were okay. Plot was okay. Historical elements were okay. But nothing was great, and nothing was really horrible except for the miscommunication thing. But I should have DNF'd this one. I should have DNF'd this one. Okay, so the next two I have to talk about, they are disappointments to me, but for very different reasons. And I will say what the reasons are, obviously, but it's not that I was disappointed in the book itself. It was that my reading experience with them wasn't what I expected it to be. It wasn't great. And I want to talk about it a little bit. So the first of those would be Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. You guys are probably thinking, what? You said you were going to continue with this series. And I am. My disappointment lies in the fact that this was not a Sanderson caliber book, and I've read his young adult before, so I knew what I was getting into, and I just didn't feel like this delivered the punch that we normally get from a Brandon Sanderson novel until the very end. And so I found myself very bored in quite a few places. And I want to also point out that I'm not a huge superheroes fan in books. I like the movies, but I really don't like it in books. And I found that out by reading Steelheart. And I'm disappointed more so because I thought that if anybody could deliver a trope that I might not like and it play out well, it would be Brandon Sanderson. That just didn't happen. And so that's why this book remains a disappointment for me. I do plan to continue to the next book, but if the next book doesn't deliver either, then I will DNF the trilogy and take it to the buy-sell trade. But yeah, I still remain a little bit disappointed. And I was planning to read the next book in April, but I don't think I'm going to get around to it because I got a lot of ALCs, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, and the next one, like I said, I don't think that this is a bad book, and I actually think it's kind of great. It just wasn't for me. It served its purpose for what I needed it to whenever I read it, but The Long Way to Small and Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, I have to say I'm so sad that I don't like it. And it was okay. It was okay. But I'm not a cozy reader. I'm not a character-driven reader. There were so many elements about it that just weren't for me. I'm a plot-driven reader. I really like grimdark stuff. I prefer dark fantasy in particular. And, I do love sci-fi. I want to point that out too. But this one, it was just like, it was a little too cozy for me, a little too soft. And while there were elements of it that I absolutely loved, that being the relationships in it, they were just really cute. The way the characters interacted with each other was amazing. And, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And it delivered something that I needed at the time that I read it. But I have to say, I'm very disappointed that Becky Chambers is not going to be an author that I read more from. I do have a novella of hers that I will probably still read, but I won't be continuing with that series. And it kind of makes me sad because like I said, I wish I liked it. I really do, because there are some things about it that I find absolutely brilliant. And then just some things that didn't click with me. Okay, and then the final disappointment that we have for this list would be A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Camerer. I have seen this book recommended so many times. And I can see why some people really like this. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it's a portal fantasy. So those two things make it really cool in a lot of people's books. And I get it. I get that part of it. But with the way everyone talks about it, I was expecting this to be a 5-star read. And so whenever I started reading it and was like, this is okay, this is fine. Now, I did end up giving it a 3.5, which I rounded up to a 4 on Goodreads. So I don't think it was bad, but I don't think that this book deserves the hype it gets. And I see a lot of fantasy booktubers book talkers, Instagrammers really hyping this book. And I just want everybody to know that not everybody loves this book. Not everybody thinks it's a 5-star read. But if you go into this, go in knowing that you're getting a standard young adult fantasy. Now, on the flip side of that, I would like to talk about some of my surprises, some of my 5-star reads. So let's get into the surprises and talk about Defy the Night by Bridget Cameraer. So I read actually Defy the Night first, so that might be why I didn't like A Curse So Dark and Lonely, because Defy the Night was really good. I gave it 4 stars, and I really like the setup we have of Defy the Night because it was very different for any fantasy I have read previous to it. So we have a girl who is trying to save her country. They are ill. The political people are hoarding the medicine, and she's trying to get in and get it distributed. And she stumbles into the castle, literally, and gets caught, and things ensue from there. But we have another POV, and that is the king's brother. And the king's brother has to be this kind of hardened character who puts on this front of not letting anybody get anything past them, and, you know, putting his foot down, being the one that, you know, follows through with the executions and things like that. But he's not all he seems. There are things about him that you're not quite expecting, and it's just fun. It's really, really fun, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed almost every aspect of the book. Why did I give it 4 stars and not 5? I do think Bridget Cameraer and her writing style is not exactly like what I would deem a 5-star writing style. And I do give leeway to YA. I give credit where it's earned in YA, but I think there's something about her writing that doesn't quite give that punch that I want in a 5-star read. All right, let's talk about a couple series that have taken me by surprise. The first would be The Last War by Mike Shackle. So I did know that quite a few people that I'm friends with really, really loved We Are the Dead. And we did it as a buddy read in January on the Oasis Discord, and I don't know what I was expecting, but let me say, your girl likes a character-driven series. Now, the 3rd book has not yet released, so I have not read it, but the first 2 were really, really good and really surprised me, especially because they are character-driven books. I wasn't expecting to really love them. However, Mike Shackle can really just come through with atmosphere, and that kept me hooked. This rebellion that's stemming from a war that, you know, is ending, but the rebellion's starting, and it's so good. Now, there is a character that drives me insane, and her name is Teenstra. The fact that I remember a character's name, that should tell you something. But other than her irritating the crap out of me, this series has been so good. I'm very excited to pick up the 3rd book, but the first book, there is so many gruesome things that are happening in this world. There are so many just horrible, horrible things these people are having to go through. It's really, really good, and it will tug at your heart just to read some of these things because, oh man, Mike Shackle just holds nothing back, and he earns that grimdark stamp. I thoroughly enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy it. Okay, and then this one, you guys aren't going to be surprised at all, but I was surprised. I was so surprised at how much I loved The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. So again, we are looking at character-driven epic fantasy. Who is she? Who is she? But I really liked Ship of Magic. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I was excited to continue, but man, did Mad Ship deliver. It delivered in a way that I was not expecting. These characters are built to a point that you either love them or hate them. And it's so good. It's so good. I really have a hard time talking about it though, because the plot of Mad Ship rides on the live ships, and it also doesn't go anywhere. So when I say that, it's one of those books which owns its middle book-ness, and none of the threads of the story are tied up. I don't know what to do with it other than read the next book. But I have put it off a little bit simply because I've told you guys I've been having some issues in life recently, and a 903-page book just didn't sound like something I wanted to tackle. But I am loving the live ship traders. I will say I am not a fan of Assassin's Apprentice, the Farseer trilogy, and I've heard quite a few people who don't want to continue with Robin Hobb because they didn't like Farseer. I would say give Live Ship a try, because I'm not going to say if I like it, anybody would like it, but I'm going to say if you didn't like Farseer, there's a chance you could still like the Live Ship traders, and you don't have to know what's going on with Fitz to read Live Ship. All right, another that I loved, and I'm just going to give my friend Andrew a shout out here because I've talked about all the books that he purchased for me in this video. And it's really great to have a friend who understands your reading taste. And I'm not saying that likes the same books that you do, because we don't always like the same books. And our reading tastes are very different. However, we understand each other's reading tastes quite a bit better than most. And so he purchased some books for me for Christmas. I purchased some books for him for Christmas. We're kind of buddy reading them as we go through the year. And anyway, this is going to be the 3rd book that he has purchased for me that has shown up on this list, but I absolutely loved it, just like he knew I was going to. And we kind of let each other read books that are, for him, I let him read character-driven books before I read them, so he can tell me if I'm going to like them. And he lets me read the plot-driven books before he reads them, so I can tell him if he's going to like them. And that's kind of the relationship that we have. But he bought all the Murmuring Bones for me, and this is Gothic at its finest. I loved it. We have mermaids, and it's so fun. And I do have to say that this has a slow start even for a Gothic novel. And I had a hard time getting into the very beginning of it. But it's about 25% through when it really hits its stride. And once it hits its stride, the rest of the book is fantastic. And so I really liked the writing style. A.G. Slater did a wonderful job of bringing atmosphere and drama and all of the elements that you expect to have, the horror of the book, the slow build, all of that. A.G. Slater did very, very well. And I will say the ending was just a little unexpected. Like, you know that something's coming, you know something's going on, but I was still finding myself a little shocked towards the end, and I love that. I love that, especially in a Gothic novel. That's what I want. I want the huge payoff in the end. I don't like slow-paced fantasy because there's usually not that payoff in the end. Now, in Gothic literature, I know that payoff is coming. I know it's coming. So I can handle that slow build a little bit more than I would any other time. But yes, All the Murmuring Bones was fantastic. Okay, and this one I just happened to have sitting beside me, so kind of cheating a little bit, but Engines of Empire by R.S. Ford. Now, if you have been paying attention, you will realize I had an ALC of this. I didn't own the physical book, so guess what? I purchased it. And that should tell you all you need to know, because you know that my shelves are revolving doors. Everything comes in and then goes out if I didn't like it or if I didn't think I was going to reread it. I bought it. And I really, really enjoyed this book a lot. So I had likened it to Greedfall in my initial review of this, which I don't have a dedicated review. I do need to do one. But I likened it to Greedfall in the fact that one of these storylines follows a character that gets involved with the tribal element of the island and kind of gets to see what colonialism looks like, what conquering kingdoms looks like. Engines of Empire. I really like the title for this book because you get to see all of the aspects of the empirical ways being played out via the POVs in this book. And I loved it. I loved it so much. And then we do have a mama bear character. It's a mama bear character who's made mistakes, but she sees all of her kids getting sent off to all of these corners of the empire and does her best to be like, okay, bring my babies back. And it is really, really good. I don't want to gush too much about this because I did do a wrap up with this book in it, but I will say I do plan to do a dedicated review as well. I loved this. I loved this. I loved this. I gave this 4.5 stars because it does read a little bit like a setup novel. A little bit. It's not completely a setup novel, but it does have a little bit of that feel to it, so I couldn't quite give it a 5-star, but I loved it. I loved it. And then, of course, I have to talk about the book that absolutely blew me out of the water, and that would be Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. My goodness. I never thought I'd read another series that topped Lightbringer. I think I have. I read Ashes of the Sun based on everybody's recommendation, saying that it was akin to Star Wars. And it is. It has some elements of Star Wars in it. Main thing being the lightsabers that they use. I mean, I don't think that's what they call them. I don't remember. But they're lightsabers. That's what they are. But I've always really loved how Star Wars shows the duality of the world, where we follow a POV from the Empire or the First Order, or however you want to look at that, and then the Resistance or the Rebels. And you get the two POVs and how this side thinks and feels and how this side thinks and feels and how each side thinks they're fighting for the right thing. I love that about Star Wars. I love that about Star Wars, and I loved that about this novel. Again, I really gushed in my wrap up with Ashes of the Sun, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but let me just say, this is a series that's gonna be a favorite. Unless Django Wexler just completely drops the ball with the coming books, it's amazing. It's amazing, and I absolutely loved it. So that is my quarter one good, bad, and ugly, and I hope you guys stick around for more content from me, like, subscribe, do all the fun things. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!